Good afternoon. Today we'll be talking about the clinical biochemistry aspect as per your new MCI syllabus, there is a chapter which is also important in practicals as well, and today we'll be talking about CSF analysis and the clinical interpretation of the CSF analysis. CSF stands for cerebrospinal fluid. It is a colorless fluid, as you already studied about the anatomy of the head and neck and the brain, and you are very familiar about the ventricles of the brain, choroid plexus, and where the CSF is produced. It's a colorless fluid present in the subarachnoid space of the brain and the spinal cord. It is formed by the choroid plexus. It's present in the ventricle. The circulation of cerebrospinal fluid is in the ventricle, cisterns, and sulcus spaces. Normally in a healthy person, about per day 150 ml of CSF fluid is produced and it is secreted. And the absorption of CSF fluid happens via the arachnoid granulation and the venous sinuses. The analysis of CSF fluid plays an important role in the management of critical cases in pediatric emergency as well as in the internal medicine emergency department, because the patient often presenting with the signs of meningitis, it is very essential to differentiate various types of meningitis, and it is caused due to various type of infections that you need to be differentiated from viral, bacterial and fungal. The CSF comes into picture, plays an important role. Thus the CSF analysis is indicated in the number 1, diagnosis of infections like meningitis. It is nothing but inflammation of meninges, we call it as meningitis. And the meningitis may be bacterial, which may be due to streptococcus pneumonia, H influenza, or it may be due to pneumococcal. So these bacteria are the one which play an important role in the causation of meningitis, especially in the newborn child, or maybe in the infant, or in the school going children. It's a very commonly that we see such kind of cases in the emergency department, especially in the pediatric emergency wards. So whenever the patient is put on the patient comes with a history of high grade fever, and patient comes with a history of chronic headache, and it is a very intense headache, and analgesics do not play an important role in reducing headache, and there is a lot of neck rigidity. Patient will complain of he has got a difficulty in the flexion or extension of the neck, because the movements are not so flexible. They are going to be restricted because of the rigidity of the neck. This is a classical history given by the patient, and of course the patient most of the time may be presenting with the convulsions, that seizures, or maybe patient may be in loss of consciousness. So the mother of the child will give you the history of all these episodes, and the patient will have severe vomiting episodes if the patient is suffering from meningitis. Such patients, when they come to the emergency department and get admitted over there, what is the line of management that has to be done? Of course the CSF pressure is going to be very high in these patients, and the management of this patient is very, very important, because the patient may lose the life, and sometimes the patient may come directly in coma. So it is very essential to differentiate whether it is a viral meningitis, a bacterial meningitis, or fungal meningitis, for which we do CSF analysis. We do examine for different type of cells. What is the biochemical investigation we do perform, like protein analysis and the sugar analysis of the CSF fluid. Then we come to one conclusion, and the type of cell that's going to be raised when we do gram staining, and when we do acid fast bacillus staining, because tuberculosis again is the commonest problem in India. So it's very important to rule out which type of infection the patient is presenting with. Most of the time maybe we think in terms of bacterial, maybe the patient is having viral meningitis, and a lot of antibiotics for streptococcus, assuming that the patient may be suffering from streptococcus pneumonia, or maybe patient is suffering from H influenza. We are continuously giving the antibiotics, but the patient even does not respond on the third day of your antibiotic, fourth day of antibiotic. Then we need to have a decision making whether it is really due to bacterial, whether it is really due to viral or fungal, because any point in this differential diagnosis of these three, if you are going to miss it, we are going to face a lot of problem. The patient will not be happy, and the patient attendants will also not be happy about your treatment protocol. That's why the CSF plays an important role in the diagnosis as well. And encephalitis, and the patient suffering from syphilis. And demyelinating diseases of the brain, especially when we talk about multiple sclerosis, which is a there is a loss of myelin sheath in the neurons, and patient will have debilitating problem that we call it as multiple sclerosis. In the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis as well, the CSF plays an important role. The other important indication of CSF analysis is in diagnosing cerebrovascular diseases of the brain, especially whenever the patient is having subarachnoid hemorrhage. We call it as hemorrhoid, that is subarachnoid hemorrhage. To have a diagnosis of subarachnoid hemorrhage, it is very important to do CSF analysis, and the patient with the brain tumor history. And before we do perform CSF analysis in patients suffering from brain tumor, we do confirm our diagnosis with the help of CT scan and MRI scan, which clearly says that the patient is having tumor of 5 into 6 centimeters, so on the depending upon the dimensions of the tumor. And the patient suffering from acute infective polyneuritis, which involves many neurons, and in such cases also CSF plays an important role. And the most commonly seen problem, that is Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is it is again a post-viral episode. The patient will present with the paralysis and restriction of the movements. Especially we do see such kind of cases about in the age group of 30 to 40 years. And this Guillain-Barré syndrome has got a very good prognosis. Given the we have picked up the the diagnosis of this GB syndrome, it is definitely most of the patient do recover very well upon the treatment, upon the confirmation of diagnosis with CSF analysis. So how are we going to collect the CSF fluid? The CSF fluid analysis needs its collection, that we call it a specimen collection, and the CSF is usually obtained between, you can look at this picture here. This is a lumbar vertebra L1, L2, L3, L4 and L5. Normally it is collected between L3 and L4. You can see the needle. This we call it as a spinal needle. We have it has got a gauze of 22 gauze. This needle is inserted into the space between L3 and L4 under aseptic precautions. The patient is lying in the left lateral position. You can see here the limbs are flexed in the flexion position, and it is in the left lateral. Even the procedure can be performed even in the sitting position, but most of the patients feel better and comfortable in left lateral position. And the needle is inserted between the L3 and L4 space, and the CSF is collected. The gauze of the needle is around 22. So how many ml of CSF has been collected? It's about roughly the literature says about 8 to 10 ml of the CSF has been collected, which will be subjected for different investigations. And after this procedure, patient may land up with post-lumbar puncture headache. Patient may complain of severe back pain. You would have heard a female who has given delivered by cesarean section do complaints of back pain, because again the cesarean section is performed under the lumbar puncture, the anesthesia, that is we call it as spinal anesthesia. Under spinal anesthesia, the lower segment cesarean section is performed during the delivery of the baby, and for this again lumbar puncture was needed through which the anesthesia will be given, and the cesarean section delivery would be performed. So post cesarean section, many of the ladies do complain of this back discomfort or back pain because of this particular procedure. And the patient who has got an decrease in the platelet count, and where the prothrombin time is prolonged, such patients may complain of bleeding and brainstem hernia. Sometimes there is a still possibility that there will be herniation of the brainstem as well. So what are the contraindications of the CSF analysis or the lumbar puncture? We cannot do it in a patient with severe raised intracranial pressure, okay, and infection at the site of lumbar puncture. Suppose if there is an infection, the localized infection at L3 and L4 spine, and it is very difficult to introduce a needle because we are going to spread the infection into the body. So it is definitely not advisable, and the patient having coagulation disorders, we are not supposed to perform lumbar puncture because the patient will land up with severe bleeding, and the patient may lose his life as well. So these are the contraindications of lumbar puncture. the sample analysis. Once we collected the sample of about 8 to 10 ml, how are we going to distribute the sample into different tubes? So we are going to have with us 4 different tubes. One first tube is used for biochemical test, through which we are going to collect the sample in fluoride tube and plain tube. Plain tube is, it has got a red color top, and fluoride tube has got a gray color top, because we are going to subject the biochemical test for the protein estimation and glucose estimation. We have already discussed enough about glucose estimation, and we have already done practicals, that is estimation of the blood glucose using glucose oxidase method. We have also discussed about various chemical methods and enzymatic methods for blood glucose estimation, like we have glucose oxidase peroxidase method, hexokinase method, and glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase method for the estimation of blood glucose. Similarly, for the protein analysis, we have done a biuret test in our lab, but here for CSF protein analysis we have a different method that we are going to tell you in the next slide. The first sample, about 1 ml of sample is used in the, it has been collected in the fluoride tube, and 2 ml of the sample we are going to put it in the plain tube, which has got a red color top. And the second 3 to 4 ml of the sample is subjected for microbiology test, which is going to be collected in the container, which has got a red color top. It's a plain container, it doesn't have any additives in it. Unlike in fluoride tube, we are going to collect for the CSF glucose, because RBCs are dependent on glucose, and again if RBCs are present, they are going to utilize your glucose present in the sample, and the estimation will give you false low values. That's the reason it's better to collect in the fluoride tube, especially in traumatic like subarachnoid hemorrhage, wherein the RBCs are plenty in the sample. In such kind of diagnosis, it is very important. Of course, in meningitis case, if you want to diagnose meningitis, we can even collect the sample in the plain tube itself for blood glucose as well. And coming to the third sample of about 2 ml, we can use it for hematology, because we ultimately depend upon the infection rate, that is with the help of WBC count and the type of cells that are going to be raised, which we call it as differential count, like neutrophil, monocyte and lymphocyte. We need to confirm whether the neutrophil count is raised, or whether the monocytes are raised, whether the lymphocytes are raised, whether eosinophil, of course it is playing a very less role here. So mainly we need to differentiate between neutrophil, lymphocyte and monocytes. And the fourth tube, we are going to preserve it for the future, if you have any doubt, and if the diagnosis is not correlating, or sometimes there may be random errors in the laboratory side. So sometimes for the reconfirmation purpose, we do store about 2 to 3 ml of the sample in the refrigerator under -8 centigrade, and we're going to preserve that sample at least for about 7 to 8 days because every time we cannot ask the physician or the pediatrician to perform lumbar analysis, and because we have done some mistake in our laboratory, can you please repeat this? Because CSF sample, of course the blood sample, if you want to ask for the repeat, still it is reasonable and it is manageable, but you cannot advise repeatedly the CSF sample, because it's very painful procedure, and it is not it is not so friendly for the patient. That's the reason only one CSF at the time of when the patient get admitted, it's better to collect before we start antibiotics, because again once you start antibiotic and do CSF estimation, again it will be misleading. That's the reason before the medication is started, the CSF analysis has to be, at least specimen collection part has to be completed. So this is about the specimen collection and analysis. Let us look into which are the biochemical tests that we are going to do it in CSF fluid. First of all, we are going to look for glucose and protein. The CSF glucose is usually estimated by GOD-POD method, and the protein is estimated by sulfosali method or colorimetric method using dyes. Okay. And there's something called CSF immunoglobulin estimation. It is performed in some diseases where we are going to study in the clinical interpretation part. It is usually estimated by immunoturbidimetric method and nephelometric method. So everyone are aware about principle of colorimetry, spectrophotometry, Beer-Lambert law, the amount of the light absorbed, amount of the light reflected. So here in nephelometry, we are going to measure the amount of light that's going to be reflected in the procedure, and we are going to do something called a CSF electrophoresis. Unlike in the serum electrophoresis, which we are going to do for protein, you do remember, right? Similarly, we are going to do CSF electrophoresis as well. There is something called immunoglobulin G index. It is calculated using the formula CSF fluid IgG divided by CSF fluid albumin. the whole divided by serum IgG versus albumin. So when we take out the ratio of CSF IgG albumin to serum IgG albumin, we do get something called as IgG index. Normally this index will be less than 0.77. If it is going to be raised, it is going to give rise to diagnosis of many abnormal conditions which we are going to discuss. And note that whenever we are going to collect the CSF fluid for the analysis, simultaneously we need to collect the blood sample as well, especially for the glucose estimation. Tell me why? Suppose the patient is a diabetic patient and he has come with the meningitis sort of picture or subarachnoid hemorrhage or any indications that we have discussed, or brain tumor, etc. Already in this diabetic patients who does not have a good glycemic control or uncontrolled diabetic patients, their blood glucose is most of the time it may be around 300 or 400. I am talking about the uncontrolled patients. In these kind of patients, suppose if we perform CSF analysis, the sugars are going to be very high. Because patient is a diabetic, the same fluid as well circulates, which is CSF. It's all body fluids contributing to the raised glucose level. That's the reason we always have to perform the blood glucose estimation along with the CSF glucose estimation for the better interpretation of the diagnosis. This is very, very important. And microbiology, we do subject the sample which we have collected in the container for gram staining for the bacteria, presence of bacteria, and we do subject it for AFP, that is acid fast bacillus staining, which is used for tuberculosis, and we are going to do subject the sample for culture to look for the antibiotic susceptibility as well. Then coming to the hematology, we do subject the CSF fluid for automated hematology machine, which is going to tell you the percentage of neutrophil, percentage of lymphocyte, percentage of basophils and monocytes, etc. And it's actually microscopic examination, cell count and microscopic examination. And coming to the normal fluid, how does it look? The color and appearance, it is totally clear and it is colorless. It's like water. And the CSF pressure should be less than 10 millimeter of water. The normal CSF protein concentration is about 15 to 45 milligram per deciliter, and normal CSF glucose is about 50 to 80 milligram per deciliter, and the cell count is 0 to 5 lymphocytes. Neutrophils are normally absent, and the RBC, note this important point, neutrophils and RBCs are absent in the CSF fluid, but it may have 0 to 5 lymphocytes. And whenever we subject the normal CSF for gram staining, definitely there should not be any bacteria, so it will be negative. And if we subject it for culture, again it should be negative, and oligoclonal bands are going to be absent in case of normal CSF fluid. What happens now? Let us look into the disease part, that is a clinical interpretation. Let us take the very first disease, that is meningitis. We need to differentiate between bacterial, viral and fungal meningitis, for which we are going to perform CSF analysis. Color and appearance will be cloudy. Let it be viral, let it be bacterial, let it be fungal. It's going to be cloudy. CSF protein is going to be elevated in tuberculosis, but yes, it is going to be more elevated in bacterial as well. The CSF glucose, because presence of bacteria, they depend on glucose for their metabolism, definitely it's going to be decreased. The type of cells in bacterial will be polymorphonuclear cells going to be raised. Okay, IgG index will be less than 0.77, and the bacteria, if it is a bacterial meningitis, the gram stain will be positive, and if it is a tubercular bacilli which is causing the meningitis, the AFP, that is acid fast bacilli stain, will be positive, and the culture is going to be positive, and oligoclonal bands are going to be absent in case of meningitis. Let us look into the table which is going to tell you about the different types of organisms causing the meningitis. In case of bacterial, when you measure the CSF pressure, it's going to be between 200 to 500, and the WBC count will be 100 to 20,000 cell per cubic millimeter. The differential count will say you that greater than 80% of the cells are neutrophils, and the protein, look at the protein, it's going to be 100 to 500 milligram per deciliter. Glucose is going to be less than 40 milligram per deciliter, and additional testing to confirm the diagnosis of bacteria is gram staining and bacterial culture, which is going to be positive. What happens in viral meningitis? Opening pressure can be normal or sometimes may be mildly elevated. WBC count falls somewhere between 5 to 500 cell per millimeter cube. And in the early phase of viral meningitis, the first predominant cells are going to be neutrophils, and later stages it can be lymphocytes. Okay, if at all neutrophils are predominant, take it for granted that it is an early stage of the viral meningitis. If it is a lymphocyte that is predominant on your microscopic examination or the differential count examination, it's going to be viral, that is going to be late onset or late phase of the meningitis. Look at the protein, it's going to be between 30 to 150 and glucose somewhere between 30 to 70. And further confirmation of viral meningitis requires additional test called polymerase chain reaction. Especially the viral meningitis is mainly caused by human, that is herpes simplex virus most commonly. This HSV confirmation requires another additional testing called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, which we have already discussed about in the earlier classes. Mycobacterial, since we are in India, the tuberculosis is the most commonest problem. Again, whenever a person from India goes to, for the job, for the overseas, the most commonly screened disease, because they do believe that Indians are more prone for tuberculosis. And of course, nowadays the things are changed, and this tuberculosis test is mandatory, right? The tuberculosis meningitis, it has got an opening pressure may be elevated, WBC count may be around 5 to 2000 cells per millimeter cube. And when we look at the differential count, most of the time it's going to be greater than 80% of them will be the lymphocytes. Protein is going to be greater than 50 and glucose going to be less than 40. And mycobacterial culture and AP staining has to be done to confirm the diagnosis of tuberculosis. In case of fungal meningitis, opening pressure is going to be elevated and WBC count falls between 20 to 2000 cell per millimeter cube. Differential count is greater than 50% are going to be lymphocytes, and the protein is going to be between 40 to 150 milligram per deciliter, and the glucose somewhere between 30 to 70. And additional testing, again it's fungal culture and the fungal smear. Mostly the fungal meningitis not so common. The most common organism in fungal meningitis will be just little bit less in the clinical practice, but more common is bacterial and viral and even tubercular as well. Now coming to what are the changes that is going to happen in subarachnoid hemorrhage? The color and appearance, because the proteins have been raised, it appears cloudy, and the CSF glucose, nothing to do with the glucose level in case of subarachnoid hemorrhage. It's going to be normal. IgG index is going to be normal, and the cells that are, because it's a hemorrhage, there's a bleeding, evidence of bleeding, so RBC will be present. There's nothing to do with the infection. The staining culture are all absent, and oligoclonal bands are as well absent. Coming to the patient coming with a brain tumor, the proteins are going to be raised again in a patient with brain tumor, and the color appears and appearance will be cloudy, and CSF glucose is going to be normal, nothing to do with infections over here again. IgG index will be normal, cells there is no change, and staining culture are going to be negative. Oligoclonal bands are also absent in a patient with brain tumor. Now the patient with demyelinating diseases like multiple sclerosis, since the CSF protein is raised, it appears cloudy. CSF glucose is going to be normal, index is going to be normal, but the cells, there is increased lymphocytes in a patient with multiple sclerosis. Staining culture is going to be negative, and the peculiar feature of multiple sclerosis, there's abnormal sort of proteins are going to be raised in multiple sclerosis, which is going to give oligoclonal bands that are going to be present upon electrophoresis. And coming to the acute infective polyneuritis or Guillain-Barré syndrome, the color and appearance is going to be cloudy because of raised CSF protein. The glucose is going to be normal. IgG index is going to be raised because of the increase in the abnormal type of immunoglobulins, and the cells are going to be absent because of albumino cytological dissociation. Staining and culture is going to be negative because nothing to do with the infections again here. Oligoclonal band may be present because of the IgG index, which is going to be raised. And today we are going to discuss about a little bit about mental retardation. It's a most common disorder associated with the impaired development. It's got a high prevalence. Males are more affected from mental retardation compared to the females. It is again X-linked inheritance. Coming to the definition of mental retardation, it refers to the clinical condition characterized by substantial limitation in intellectual functioning. The patient will not be having good communication skills, and he lacks self-care. Something falls on his clothes, he is not bothered, and he has got very low standards of living. He doesn't bother about the way he lives, and he lacks absolutely the social skills, community mixing up with the people, self-directed directions, and health care and academic career. He is not able to do well in the school and not able to perform in its examinations and work leisure. These are the problems that is accounted in a patient with mental retardation. How are going to classify the IQ? Intelligent quotient is derived from the formula mental age divided by chronological age into 100. Suppose someone has got a mental age of 30 divided by his age, his chronological age is 20, multiplied by 100 is somewhere 150 will be his IQ. So the patient with mild mental retardation, we do call a patient suffering from mild mental retardation when his IQ falls between 55 to 69, and we do call it as moderate if it is 40 to 54, severe when it is 25 to 39, profound when it is less than 25. And there is another group of population, we call this sometimes you would have heard in your batchmates or in the previous seniors, sometimes some students first time they fail, second time also they fail, third time they do fail, and after that they start losing interest in examination because they are called as slow learners. They are unable to learn like the other normal peer group people. These slow learners have got a IQ of 70 to 80. And causes, what are the causes of this mental retardation? It can be in the prenatal stage because of the chromosomal abnormalities, or individuals having a strong family history of mental retardation, like a child, the previous child of the same parents suffered from the Down syndrome, or their grandparents having mental retardation history. Such kind of factors will account for consanguineous marriage, and women who is elderly aged more than 35 years conceiving for the first time, and female or male with the history of smoking, alcohol. Such kind of toxicants can have a profound impact on the growing the fetus, subjected for many injuries, free radical damage resulting in several chromosomal abnormalities, addition or deletion, mutations which are resulting in many congenital disorders. And perinatal, during the birth of the baby, there may be birth asphyxia, or because of the heavy weight of the baby which is allowed for the normal vaginal delivery, because of the heavy the baby's weight may be around 4.5 kg, such difficult labor, and the patient, the baby having larger head, we call it as macrosomy. Such kind of risk factors can also account for the mental retardation. Proper lack of oxygenation soon after the delivery due to birth asphyxia. Such kind of problems can account for the mental retardation in the newborn baby. So what are the biochemical investigation that could be carried out to come to a conclusion of mental retardation? We can look for the screening test for carbohydrate, like the many disorders of the carbohydrate metabolism, like galactosemia, congenital galactosemia, galactosuria, then lactosuria, which we have already discussed, that's called lactose intolerance. Such kind of diseases can account for MR cases, and patient with lipid storage disorders and amino acidurias and hypothyroid. So the most commonest problem that could be reversible in the newborn period. That is the reason the newborn screening plays an important role to pick up the diagnosis of a mother with a history of hypothyroidism. He has got a possibility that the baby may have hypothyroid. That case, whenever the baby is born, immediately the blood sample has to be subjected for the thyroid testing. Especially in a newborn child, the sample is taken from the heel, not from the normal vein for the adults, but it is from the heel prick. On the lateral and the medial aspects of the heel, we can take the blood sample with the lancet prick, and we have to keep that blood spot on the filter paper, and this filter paper will be sent for the screening purpose to major cities. Currently the newborn screening is performed in Mumbai, Delhi, in such kind of cities. This platform is still available. Additional tests to diagnose amino acidurias like phenylketonuria, tyrosinemia type 1, tyrosinemia type 2, homocystinemia, homocystinuria. These amino acid disorders we can diagnose with the help of a technology called high performance liquid chromatography, mass spectroscopy, and gas liquid chromatography immunoassays. We can come to the conclusion that yes, the baby may be having several type of amino aciduria as well, like branched chain keto, that is maple syrup urine disease, we call it as, right? There's a deficiency of branched chain amino acid hydroxylase, right? So these are the things which gives rise to the baby may be prone for mental retardation because of the lack of this nutrients in the baby. And a comprehensive analysis we can even subject, suppose if you want to diagnose lipid storage disorders, we can determine it by the measuring the enzymatic activity in the cultured fibroblast, and sometimes we can even perform chromosomal analysis, which we have already discussed in our genetics, but RFLP technology we have discussed, right? Using those technology we can even perform the chromosomal analysis, and CT MRI scan in children with the seizure, focal seizures, microcephaly, and tuberous sclerosis, which we are going to study in the final year mostly. And in these cases we can have a CT and MRI scan to be done. So this is about the CSF analysis. This can come for the short answer question as a 5-mark question, but in the practical examination, this again it's an important question, that is about CSF analysis. And please do read about clinical interpretation, the normal CSF findings, and what happens in different types of meningitis, what happens in subarachnoid hemorrhage, what happens in brain tumor. So one should be knowing about this. And apart from this, we can also discuss about Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease as a part of CSF analysis under clinical interpretation. Anyhow, the CSF analysis doesn't play much vital role in the picking up the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease and the Alzheimer's disease, but do read about dementia just for the knowledge purpose. Anyway, it is not there in your syllabus, but still for the purpose of knowledge you can study a little bit about what is dementia, what is coma, what are differential diagnosis of coma at your first year level, and you can also study about different type of abnormal proteins that are going to be present in Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease, what happens in why there is a dopamine deficiency, what is substantia nigra's role in Parkinson's disease, why the levodopa is used in the treatment of Parkinson's disease. Please do read about all these aspects. And anyway, so we are going to come to an end of this class, and next we will be taking from July. We will see about the syllabus. Thank you.